So thank you to Coastal Pharmacy and Wellness for hosting. Bless you. My name is Mischa Schuler, and I'm the director of Wild Carrot Herbs. I offer herbal consultations on Brighton Avenue in the Rosemont neighborhood, and also classes like here, and then more formal apprenticeship programs that run throughout the school year, sort of like September through June. So my goals for you this evening, little did I even know that this is exactly what my goal for our evening was going to be until pretty recently, as I was giving this thought. I would love for you to walk out tonight having confidence in 8 or 10 medicinal plants that you could bring into your garden this year, maybe get to know. But how are we going to determine which of those plant friends are going to be in your garden this year? So my strategy for this is threefold. I'd love to invite you to, don't do it yet, but I'm going to invite you to talk to a neighbor to sort of have a brief discussion about the type of yard that you have, or deck that you might have, or front stoop that you might have to put containers, because of course all of our herbs don't have to be in the ground. They could be in containers. And many of the herbs we'll talk about tonight will be really enthusiastic regardless of where they get planted. The second step of this evening, as I'm sort of envisioning it, but this could also change, is I'm going to give you an index card in a little bit, and I'm going to invite you to write down what are 3 health conditions that have been on your mind, because we want the herbs that you bring into your life to match. The herbs are so beautiful and so gratifying, but we also want them to match what it is that you are currently valuing in your life, so that they are a gift in many, many ways, on many levels, so that they're really supporting you on a physical level, as well as just being beautiful. But really, to get started, I'd like you to share with your neighbor, or a neighbor, or someone behind you, if you don't mind looking at the Facebook camera, something that you're really excited about, maybe an area of your yard that is particularly interesting, or a sense of, I have mostly shade, I have mostly damp. I mean, the 3 qualities that are the most, I would say, significant to consider are there areas where when you walk in it, it's really soggy in the springtime. Maybe it's not soggy all summer, or maybe it is, but noting areas where there's water that's stagnant, that's maybe not the nicest word, but water that kind of sticks around. So that's one major consideration. The second consideration is, where do you have areas of lots of sun, and where do you have areas of lots of shade? And then where's that border line? Because there are plants that do really wonderfully in each of those 3 environments. And so let's just take 2 minutes, find someone, or if you just want to think about it on your own, that's great too. But I want us to really make what we're talking about this evening truly applicable, so we can go home and look through these seed catalogs and get really excited, because what else are we going to do on a rainy night besides eat vegetable soup or chicken soup and look through a seed catalog? I can't think of anything more fun. So let's start with that. So let's go ahead and take 2 minutes. So friends, I love that you've actually made friends. And it wouldn't be quite complete if we didn't have a little bit of an herbal something. Don't do it quite yet. We're gonna kind of do a little, what do you call it? We're gonna do shots. I mean, there is a tiny little bit of alcohol in here. Or do you not? There might be a little. I did not make this, but it was given to me. No, it's given to me today by someone I really trust. And it's like, no, I've already had some, and I'm doing all right. Hi, you came just in time. Don't drink it quite yet until I tell you. That's okay. I'm glad you're here. There's one person who hasn't received their. Here you go. So I think we should do a little toast, but let me tell you what's in here before we do that, so you know what it is. So this is a combination of lemon balm, which is in the mint family, and another mint family buddy called holy basil, or sacred basil, or Tulsi basil. It goes by all 3 of those names. And it truly is a plant that has a relationship with the sacred, and people who drink the tea regularly begin to experience a sense of open-heartedness and perhaps a deeper connection with their experience of source. So it's a lovely annual, very easy to grow, loves being in pots, prefers full sun. It will handle a little bit of shade, but it really loves full sun. It's an annual in our bioregion. If we lived in Florida, maybe it would live all year round. It's native to southern India. And it has a relationship with, in India, it's considered to be venerated to keep the body healthy and safe throughout the year. And it's associated with the god Yama, the god of death. And so it's provided as a method of sanctification and appeasement for the god. And so I realize that's sort of a really strange note to start on, but let us give gratitude for the fact that we're all able to be here tonight, and for the health that we do have in our lives. So cheers. Mm-hmm.
Because that's not on here, is it?
I did not put it on there. There's something a little sweet. I didn't make this. It's a little bit of syrup. Sorry, I should have said that. There's a little bit of honey in here. So, lemon balm. So lemon balm is another mint. The Latin name is Melissa, and it's beloved by the honeybees. The mints do so well in the garden. Generally speaking, mints love full sun, but they'll also do okay in partial shade. Not super shade. So basically, the mints will do well up to, I would say, between 30 and 40% shade, in the sense that, if the summertime is like a 15 to 16 hour day ish, mints will do well if there's sun like 8 to 10 hours a day, or more. But after that, it becomes a little it's not that they won't do well, they just won't spread. And sometimes that's good. You may not want peppermint or spearmint to spread because they have these extraordinary rhizomes and they really love visiting all nooks and crannies of your garden. So in that case, putting peppermint or spearmint in a shady place is a great strategy for containment. So it does depend on your goals. I would also say, and I don't know exactly, having never done this particular experiment, that probably the medicinal properties are going to be a little bit different if the plant has been planted in a shady location because of the natural stress of not having as much sunlight. You know what I'm saying? If it's only getting 4 hours of sun a day, it's going to have a different, I don't know, je ne sais quoi. Yeah, different makeup. Exactly. So that's something to consider. But the other fun thing is that you can make wonderful goodies with the herbs that you have in your garden for health. And so the holy basil, as we just said, is really lovely for supporting the body through cold and flu conditions. As a general, some people call it an adaptogen. An adaptogen is a plant that typically adaptogens are roots, not always, or berries. A denser plant material tends to support bringing energy to denser body tissues. But adaptogens are very commonly used, particularly in Russia, for, say, athletes who are going to be stressing their bodies in particular ways and needing to move their bodies or go to extreme environments, like particularly hot or cold environments. Adaptogens were originally begun to be studied by Soviets in the late 60s as they were putting astronauts or cosmonauts into space, because clearly it's a stressor to not be in our current experience of gravity, I mean, I don't know. I say somehow we know what that's like, but we don't know what that's like. Or if you know what that's like, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Maybe we can meet for tea. I don't know what that's like. But so let me go back and bring this closer to home. Let me talk for just a moment about the benefits of lemon balm. So lemon balm is really extraordinary as a plant for people who struggle with recurrent shingles or herpes infections. particularly cold sores. Herpes can be drunk daily as an infusion. It's also a gladdening herb. It's really a lovely plant for days like this where we have a rainy day and things are just a bit on the gloomy side outside. Lemon balm, its sunny, lemony nature reminds us that there's always sun even behind the clouds. So I think of it as being specific for somebody who, I mean, it could be uplifting for anybody. It's calming for little children, for littler people, but for adults, typically we experience it as calming and uplifting at the same time. So a gentle, relaxed capacity to be present and to be a.
I think that many of the mints have these beautiful heart-opening qualities and allow us to be more relaxed,
But also more relaxed in the physique so that we can really enjoy the people that we're with. So when I'm thinking about what are health conditions that we don't have to share these, but I just want them to be on our mind so that as I'm maybe speaking about a couple of different plants tonight, you can jot them down on your list. So we might be thinking about the respiratory system. We might be thinking about the nervous system. So even the lemon balm or the holy basil are wonderful nervous system supports. They are tonifying and rejuvenating. So if there's been, if you take one and pass it along, if there's just been general tension or nervous irritation because life, right? They can just be really lovely. And when I say calming, it's not quite really what I mean by calming, like it calms us down. It strengthens our nervous system and allows us to be more resilient. That's really what they're doing. So say
doesn't fully capture the intelligence of the relationship.
Provide our bodies and our spirits. So I'm thinking about respiratory things, nervous system things, maybe aches and pains, whether that be muscular or tendon challenges, perhaps. Let's see, skin conditions, maybe digestive concerns. So things, just so that you have like a way, not that we want to pigeonhole any one herb, because we'll just, if we spent time studying the plants, we would realize that most of the plants can support the digestive system, and by supporting the digestive system and relaxing the digestive system, the nervous system relaxes. And then we also find that the skin clears up because the digestion is improved. It's like it becomes this, so we can't really pigeonhole any plants. Oftentimes they have far-reaching effects. And so sometimes picking one or two herbs that have these unexpected far-reaching effects and putting them in your garden and developing a relationship with them can be really profound. Can change our lives. So I have some handouts, and I know some of you have the handouts, and I don't know yet whether or not.
And I think maybe what we'll do is one of these handouts that I made for our class tonight. This is really talking about specific types of soil.
Shade, moist loam, well-drained loam, light sandy soil, clay soil, chalky soil, marshy ground. You don't really need to know the details. I think that knowing full sun, partial shade, those things are way more important than exactly what kind of soil you have, in my opinion. Mm-hmm.
What about acidic or not?
That can be meaningful. Certainly blueberries do really wonderfully in acidic soil. I'm not exceedingly knowledgeable about plants that grow well in acid soil, but there is one plant. Do you have an acidic part of your yard?
The lilies in the valley.
Oh.
So there's something not good.
They're beautiful. Well, there are some really magical endangered plants that would possibly grow well in that part of your yard. And one of them is false unicorn root, which is a plant that is specific to the ovaries. I mean, I think of it for women's health, but it's been over harvested for the past several generations. So I have a couple seeds with me. because it's like really a magical plant. So if you would like a few to try to start, I'm giving them out very, not liberally, but like judiciously, yes. So there's this handout about soil types, and if you'd like to take one and pass it on, that'd be great. And then this is such a fun handout that I prepared for the Common Ground Fair some years ago. It's 29 teas or tasty teas for kids and grown-ups, easy to grow at home. And I go through each of, and part of what's important is, well, how are we actually going to prepare these things? Like, so we plant these things, but then what? Well, how do we make lemon balm every day? How do we make holy basil every day, or every third day, or when we walk past it and we experience the scent and it reminds us to make it, right? Because we want to be able to go out to our gardens and, oh, today I feel experiment. Oh, today I want some bee balm. Oh, today I'm going to have a little calendula in my tea. So I think it might be fun to go through the 29 tasty teas really briefly. And the reason I say this is because when we're talking about your list of considerations that you'd like to support, this is a great place to start. And so the ways that we're going to make these would be potentially an infusion, which is when you have it's kind of like making a tea. When we say we're going to make a tea, what we really mean is we're going to make an infusion. We put our tea leaves or flowers into a container, a vessel of some kind. We bring water to a boil. We allow it to boil, but then we let it rest for a minute so it's no longer actively boiling when we pour it over the plants. And then we cover it with a saucer for maybe 10 to 12 minutes. If it's an aromatic plant, so like lemon balm or like the holy basil, any of the mint family plants, we want to cover the plant material so that all those wonderful aromatics, where most of the medicine lies, the antispasmodic, antiviral, some of the antibacterial properties are, we want to keep them in the water. So that's how we're going to prepare an infusion. If we wanted to, if we were thinking about nettles, which, raise your hand if you've ever experienced stinging nettles. Does anyone want to describe what their experience was like? Did you want to describe about your experience? It kind of burns. So stinging nettles has formic acid in it the same way that stinging ants do. But that formic acid provides a very protein-dense, basically stinging nettles is about, between 15 and 18% protein when it's dry, which is tremendous for a plant. So it's so much in the sting where we have access to that protein. It only stings when it's fresh and just a little bit when it's dried. Once it's had hot water poured over it, it won't sting anymore. Really grows nicely in lightly damp areas. It likes moist areas. It'll do okay in dry areas. It'll stay more contained in a dry area. But if you put nettles in your yard, you will always have nettles in your yard. So this is not an herb that I don't want to discourage people from putting nettles in their yard, but it's one that we have to have consideration with because it does sting. We may not want it visiting our neighbors' yards. There's a little bit of responsibility associated with putting nettles in your yard. But, oh yeah.
If you buy an herb or you plant it from seed, can you just take a couple leaves and stick them in a salad?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can just kind of mix it in there.
You can mix it, absolutely.
You don't need to turn it into a concoction of anything.
No, you really don't. So the question was, if you have a plant, can you just harvest some leaves here and there, add it into a salad? It's not necessary to make a concoction, and absolutely putting things right into salad, chopping things up like parsley or a little bit of mint to put into a Greek salad or something like that brings so much deliciousness. Or fresh thyme on a summer, I don't even know, something delicious. But it's hard to think about summer a little bit right now. So when the plants are nutritive, when it's not about volatile oils that we're looking for, but it's the minerals of the plant, so like nettle leaf, red raspberry leaf, alfalfa, red clover, comfrey, when we're thinking about nutrient density, so if somebody has osteoporosis or osteopenia, those would be some of the plants we might be thinking about.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, they're actually, some of them are listed under nutritive, but not all of them. Nettles, red clover, red raspberry, alfalfa, comfrey. Those are really lovely ones to grow for their minerals. They have, not all of them, but many of them have deep tap roots and will draw up deeper residing mineral nutrients. And then they'll be bioavailable in tea form. So I think about making overnight infusions for gaining the maximum amount of minerals. So that means what I do when I remember to do it. So, let's be realistic. There are good days when we remember to do all the things, and there are days when, or weeks when we don't. But typically, around the time that I brush my teeth at night, I think, oh yeah, I've got to make my mineral tea for the next morning. I put on the hot water, electric kettle, and then put a handful of herbs into the bottom of a mason jar. And then I go off and do my part of my, bedtime routine, and then I come back and I pour the hot water over those nutritive herbs, cap them, and let them sit on the counter overnight. Certainly in weather like this, I wouldn't be worried about fermentation or anything like that. In the summertime, you could stick things in the refrigerator. So that's a really fun way. The next morning, you strain things out, and you can sip on it throughout the day, and you're really supporting bone density that way. So for osteopenia, Susan Weed, an interesting herbalist in upstate New York, she talks about having seen osteopenia reversed with nearly daily drinking of nettles for the course of a year. And that's really, of nettles, stinging nettle leaf. That's pretty tremendous.
And are you generally having dried them, or are you using fresh or combo?
In the summertime, I try to make things that's fresh as much as possible just because it's available.
What about winter?
In the winter, I use dried herbs. Yeah.
So do you do the same like with herbs, like spices? Double the fresh but half the dried?
Yes, double the fresh, más o menos, like you can use your intuition on this, double the fresh, and then, relative to dry herbs, which is sort of what I was just talking about, you'd add more fresh herbs because the fresh herb have so much moisture in them already, so you're doubling that amount because the concentration is reduced a little bit because it's a fresh plant. One thing that I'll do with the mints that are so delicious, rather than make a fancy tea or do anything like that, if I'm in the garden and I have a quart mason jar or a pint mason jar, I'll just put a few, like 3 or 5 sprigs of something right into the water, and then it brings this delicious taste into the water. It's lovely and refreshing, and even if you're not at home near your garden throughout the day, you still feel connected to this important place in your life, which I think can be really meaningful and quite powerful. So I don't have experience growing every single plant on this list. I have experience growing, I think, 27 of the 29 plants, but I just had to, 27 of the 29 plants. I'd say that's pretty good. So aniseed is this is one of the ones that it's like the first one, and I haven't grown it before, which is a little, it's a wonderful gut antispasmodic. Some people really love the flavor of anise. Some people aren't super into it. It increases breast milk. So if there's someone in the family who, this is another thing. Do you need galactagogues, lactation support? So anise is lovely for supporting milk. Breast milk. Burdock is considered to be a very exceptional liver herb. It supports the liver in appropriately shuttling fats to where they need to go. So if someone is thinking about working on cholesterol levels, this can be a really nice herb to incorporate into the garden. It's very gentle. It has a mild laxative effect. So if constipation is a concern, that's something to consider. I think, great question. I'm talking about the root. The seeds have a relationship with kidney health, and supporting improved kidney waste, like waste removal in the kidneys, so that appropriate urine output. It's been used for folks with type 2 diabetes. And it's an old school remedy. It's like not one that you'd see in commerce. It's sort of like it's like a couple of generations back, it was something that was more common to do. But the root, burdock root, is also called gobo. It's part of a Japanese food. It's kind of like a turnip in a way. And it would work really nicely in a chicken soup or something like this, or a vegetable soup, along with turnips, carrots, potatoes, other things like this. And it's very nourishing, again, to any areas where appropriate fat storage is. Let me give you a good example. So like the skin is made out of cholesterol molecules, as is all the areas along the mucous membranes of the digestive tract. And we know that because if we walk outside in the rain, we don't get soaking wet through and through. I mean, we do if we are in a bathtub for more than like 10 minutes or something like this, right? But generally speaking, things roll off of our skin. So if we're having a hard time with wound healing of the skin or wound healing along the mucous membranes, burdock can support appropriate healing by helping to shuttle the fats back to the skin or to the mucous membranes to heal those areas. It's also known as a blood alterative. So again, I haven't brought up that word yet, but blood alterative is something that somehow magically supports the elimination organs, so that if there's discomfort in the joints from rheumatism, for example, often that material that's been stagnant in the joints is drawn out through the elimination organs, whether that be kidney or liver. It's hard to say because it's a blood alterative, which is a very old word for alters the blood, basically. But it's through the elimination organs. And we have 4 elimination organs. We have the kidneys, the liver, so kidneys through urine, the liver through excrement. There's not a good word for that. The lungs through exhalation. And then if those other 3 methods of elimination aren't working, things will come out through our skin. So burdock can be a really good one for skin conditions. I'm going to move on to calendula because there's 29 friends that we're going to talk about. And I still want you to have at least 10 minutes or 15 minutes at the end to kind of like brainstorm and visualize. Calendula is so fun, so brightening. It comes in yellow, it comes in orange. It is a joyful annual and it will reseed with abundance, but it's not like, you're not like, I've got too much calendula. You're like, I have so much calendula. This is wonderful. It's such a lightning, lovely herb. It is wonderful to pull off the heads when they're really in their beautiful yellow or orange abundance, and to dry them. I don't dry them in any special way. I just dry them in a bowl on the kitchen table, much to my husband's chagrin, because there's like stuff all over the kitchen table in the summertime. Just what happens. And it's a fantastic antifungal. It's a fantastic, gentle, antimicrobial, but it has these wonderful skin healing properties. This time, not working through the liver to support healing of the skin, but by working directly on the granulosa cells of the top layer of skin cells and stimulating regeneration of skin. Appropriate growth. It's not going to stimulate inappropriate skin growth. But that's also the top layer of cells, epithelial cells in the mucous membrane. So if somebody has gastric reflux and they want to heal the esophagus, or if somebody has a baby with diaper rash, making a nice oil out of calendula will support healing of something like diaper rash. It doesn't even have to be a diaper rash. It could be a bug bite or anything like this. One thing to say about topical products that have oil in them, we just don't want to put them on the skin if there's an open wound. If something's actively bleeding, we want to make sure that we have a nice scab before we're applying something oily on it. I've used it internally for people who have yeast infections. It's, like I said, antifungal. I mean, we would be doing other things too internally, but topically as a suppository, so it can be helpful in that regard. Wonderful for sunburns as well. And it's a favorite of mine for lymphatic drainage. So up here, if somebody has swollen glands, okay, if I have swollen glands, it's my go-to herb because it also is a mild antimicrobial. So not only are we stimulating the lymphatic system to move and to drain back into the bloodstream to clear out through the liver, we're also, I'll answer your question in just a moment, but we're also, I don't know what I was going to say. Oh, we're stimulating the immune system a little bit. Yes?
So if you had swollen glands and you wanted to use that herb, how would you prepare it?
So I would do it one of two ways. I would either make a tea, and I would want the tea to be hot because the resin, so like when you pick the flowers off, you'll notice that there's like a little bit of resin on the green, like the green underside where you pull off the head of the flower. And the resins are in the sticky part. So we want hot enough water so that some of those resins will melt and they'll come up to the top of your mug, exactly, so that you're drinking some of that. The other way that we could do that is by making an alcohol-based tincture. Alcohol, particularly high percentages of alcohol, although it's not necessary, but I like to use at least 100 proof, 50% alcohol to steep the flower heads in that alcohol to prepare a tincture. Yeah. I will also say that historically, calendula, which part of the reason that it gets its name is that it's originally a Mediterranean plant and it grows throughout the calends of the year. So grows through the calendar year. And it was considered to be something that would be put in soups. So historically, it would just be thrown into soups as a general immune tonic. So you don't have to wait for an acute situation to add that to your food. And I would say like between 6 and 8 flower heads to a large pot of soup, or even a medium-sized soup. Catnip. We know that catnip makes your cat happy. That might be an area that you want to consider for your garden. It will bring neighboring cats to your yard if that's depending on your neighborhood, that might be not a big deal, but in some neighborhoods that might be a consideration of not planting catnip. It becomes very personal. It's a digestive antispasmodic. It's very relaxing to the digestive system. It's not a stimulant generally in humans the way it is for cats. It's also a really lovely herb, and it's in the mint family, so it is a perennial. And so if you plant it in an area, you'll discover that it will slowly begin to spread. It's not a quick spreader like peppermint or spearmint, but it will over time, particularly in a sunny area. I don't want to say take over. It will just expand. Chamomile. Chamomile is a really amazing plant. I would say that it's, a lot of people, raise your hand if you have chamomile in your cupboard. Yeah, right? But I bet we only know like 3 ways that it's amazing. There's like so many ways. If we had first of all, we need to know that we don't have an allergy to eczema. Most of us probably, if we have it in our cabinet, know that we don't have an allergy to it. But it's a wonderful anti-inflammatory topically. So if you have it in tea bags or even loose, but in tea bags, this can be really helpful. You moisten it with hot water, and then you can apply it to an area of discomfort. You can apply it to an eye if somebody has pink eye. It's a specific for pink eye, relieving the inflammation there and also to help remove the gunk that happens. You could use it as a steam for pink eye as well, or any other sort of sinus condition. And then I'm sure we all know it as like a belly relaxant. So if there's nausea or butterflies in the stomach, but also for children who are having tantrums, or even adults who are having tantrums about whatever they're having a tantrum about. It's like, so it helps to bring down frustration. And that's really powerful. I don't think of chamomile as being a sedative in the sense that I don't think that it puts someone out. I think that it relaxes the belly and therefore relaxes the psyche through relaxing the stomach. I have seen it listed as a sedative in some herb books, but I don't really agree with that. I think it's a relaxant, an antispasmodic to the belly, less so the lower bowels. So if somebody were having discomfort in the small intestines or large intestines, like a lot of flatulence or something, I would be thinking more about anise, which was the first plant that we talked about, and possibly catnip as well. And some others that we'll get to as we keep on going. So comfrey is very, very mineral rich. And it has very strong wound healing properties. And I'm feeling a little sad that I didn't bring samples of all of these friends to show you tonight. I just didn't quite know. I was like, should I make slides? I don't know. I'm going to start speaking a little more quickly about these because I want us to like change things up in a few minutes. So comfrey, wonderful wound healer, really specific for supporting bone density. If someone is using liver medications, I would take caution with this plant and use it maybe just once a week. If someone isn't on liver medication or knows that their liver is fine, I would have no trouble using it, for a week, then taking a break for a week, and then taking it for another week and taking a break from it. It has something in it called pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which have been shown to impact liver enzyme function when it's fed to mice at like 500 times their weight. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like the likelihood of a human being actually doing too much is really unlikely. And pyrrolizidine alkaloids, there are other things in comfrey that are hepatic protective, liver protectant. So again, the likelihood of actually doing any damage to oneself is very slim because we're talking about one constituent, but a plant is made up of like 300 constituents, many of them having very positive effects. So the overall, but that's sort of a bit philosophical. So I would have no problem with people drinking comfrey every day. And I'm sure lots of people did drink comfrey every day until the 70s when people started talking about pyrrolizidine alkaloids. You know what I'm saying? It's like, echinacea, many of us might know this as a purple coneflower. Really lovely to grow. It grows about 2.5 to 3 feet high. It can make really nice back borders. So if you want something to frame other shorter flowers, it can be really lovely. And all of the parts of the plants are medicinal. So I usually harvest some of the flowers are so beautiful, it's hard to harvest them. Like the calendula that I was mentioning that you harvest, like the next day there will be like 10 more calendula blossoms. But with echinacea, the echinacea will reflower if you harvest the flowers, but they don't pop up quite so rapidly as the calendula flowers do. So there is a little bit of sadness for me when I harvest my calendula flowers, but there is great medicine in the leaf and flower of echinacea. And when we harvest the echinacea flowers, the latest research that I'm aware of suggests that the immune enhancing properties of the echinacea are particularly strongest in the flowers just before the flowers actually are open. It's like when they're just starting to come out, like just little rays coming out. Yeah, almost like a sprout. Yeah. So, and I would usually put that in tincture. That would be my suggestion. I've never tried drying echinacea flowers. I'm sure it's possible. I just don't know. I think that you're going to get as much medicine as possible from them if you tincture them fresh in alcohol, and you can use 80 proof alcohol for that, and that would be fine. I would say it is said that the strongest echinacea that grows in North America is Echinacea angustifolia, which is actually a plains echinacea. The one that grows native in our bioregion is Echinacea purpurea, which is said not to be quite as strong as the angustifolia. But since it's the native plant to here, it does have medicinal properties. Purple. They're all purple. The medicinal ones tend to be purple. Yeah. Elderberry. Elderberry is so amazing. We probably all know of it for its immune building properties. It's very high in antioxidants. We can use it as a prophylactic so that we are healthy all winter. We can also use it in acute situations when we're just coming down with something. We can use it to soothe the sore throat or a cough. Absolutely. So elderberries get large. They like areas that are a little bit damp. They don't love to be like soaking wet feet, but they'll be very happy in an area that's a little bit damp. They'll do okay with, I mean, they prefer full sun, but we have elderberries in the yard that don't get sun until like, I don't know, like 10 in the morning, and they're really happy. If you don't want to buy elderberry plants, you just call me or email me, and I'm going to take cuttings. I took about 30 cuttings, maybe 40 cuttings last year, and the majority of that, well, I'd say 70% of them took. So, I mean, they're this big, but if you're patient, I mean, the thing is like an elderberry bush within like 3 to 5 years will get very big, quite big. And it's like, it'll just take off. It'll do particularly good if you stick it into like a pat of, cow manure. But like if you, it just good fertile soil is, or even soil, like it doesn't have to be amazing soil. It'll do all right. You can eat the seeds, but you don't want to chew the seeds. But it's okay if you swallow the seeds. It's just that we don't want to break open the seeds. If they pass through the system, it's okay. If you do chew like 3 of them or 5 of them, it's fine. It's just you wouldn't want them in high abundance chewed up because it will cause some toxicity. It just means that you would have nausea. It's not like it would be terrible. I mean, nausea could be terrible, but you know what I'm saying. You know another remedy for that. I'm kidding. And I'm not kidding, but Elecampane is a really awesome herb. It's native to Europe, and the root is used. It's a perennial, but it's possible to harvest some of the roots and put the remainder of the root back in the earth. And it's really specific for people who get colds and the cold goes to their chest. So it's you know, some people just have that pattern. It's like, I caught a cold, in 3 days it's going to be in my chest. And this is the remedy to take starting that first day when that person gets a cold so that it doesn't go to their chest. It's a really pungent plant, and it breaks up stagnation and brings, and kind of moves energy outward. So the cold doesn't ever have the chance to even make it into the chest. It has a perfume quality. Do you by chance happen to have it with you? Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you. We'll pass this bottle of Elecampane around. So here, thank you. So cool that you happen to have it. So we'll just take, I recommend 1 drop kind of on this part of your hand. Because usually that's a pretty clean spot on your hand, but it also makes it more hygienic since we'll be passing it around. And it's mildly bitter. It's very aromatic and airy and pungent, and tastes maybe a little bit like an orange peel. Fennel is the #1 herb for colicky babies. It's an incredible antispasmodic to the lower bowels. So if there's a lot of wind or flatulence, made in, like crushing the seeds and making it into a tea. Most of these herbs that I've talked about so far, in fact, all of the herbs that are on this handout really love to be in the sun. They'll all do okay with a little bit of shade, but probably not even, yeah, they'll all do fine with a little bit of shade, but I wouldn't say even partial shade. Like a partial shade, they'll still do okay, but they won't necessarily be as vigorous.
A quick question. So something like fennel, if you're cooking with it, will they generally have the same qualities or characteristics as if you were using it like a seed or a tincture or? Yeah, that's one of the most incredible ways for us to stay healthy. But I would just add the seeds closer to the end of what you're cooking, so that the aromatics remain in the food. Yeah. Yeah, truly. I mean, most cultures
add lots of aromatic spices into their cooking for balance, but also it's like, you know, in most cultures where there isn't so much antiseptic hand bacterial soap, people get worms, you know, and by incorporating these pungent herbs and spices, we're reducing the likelihood of those worms taking hold in the digestive system. So often most traditional cultures have periods of the year, either in the spring or the fall or both, where there are very specific liver herbs that are used as part of a cleansing process that reduces the likelihood of worms kept staying in the body. You know what I'm saying? Like it's part of the culture. We don't really have that here. What do we? Yeah. Okay. You're so welcome. I hope this is useful.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
What are people thinking about the elecampane tincture? I saw one who would never take this ever again. No, I was actually looking at the gentleman in the green shirt in front of you. It's all right. Sure. Bye. Safe travels tonight.
It does taste like orange.
Yeah, it's a nice, like, airy quality. I've also made it before. So this was made with fresh root, but if you dry the root first and then make a tincture, it tastes more bitter. You get more of the bitter than the aromatics. And I didn't bring that tincture tonight for people to taste. So ginger I've grown in a pot before. So you could literally, inside the house, in a sunny window. Basically, you know, if you go to the grocery store and get a nice ginger root, one that is beginning to have one of those little bulbs, you know, it's like I think you would know if you saw it. And you would want to plant the root so that the bulb is, you know, just below the surface of your pot. And basically what happens is that the ginger root begins to expand. It takes time for the ginger root to grow bigger, but it's sort of like if you've ever planted garlic before, each garlic clove over the course of a season becomes a new entire bulb. So you could potentially, with your ginger root, break off little areas where you see that there are new sprouts coming, and then each of those sections would then become one big ginger root again. It would take probably 8 to 10 months, but it's pretty exciting when you use your own ginger. If you have a greenhouse here in Maine, you could probably also do it, but I don't have a greenhouse. I just have a little 2-bedroom bungalow. There's not enough room for all the things.
I know somebody's growing it around here, and selling it at farmers market and food and stuff, and it's so interesting to see it fresh versus what we typically buy in the store. Skin. Like piece of skin. It's amazing. It's sweeter. It's more moist. It's just wonderful.
Okay, in the pot, how do you know where to aim it?
What I would do is I would buy some ginger from the grocery store and I would let it sit on the counter for a week or maybe 2 weeks or even 3 weeks. And at some point, sometimes the ginger just ends up like, but if you get a really robust piece, you'll see these areas that look like they want to sprout, like a little cap. Yeah, like a little nub will begin to form, and it's usually a lighter whitish color. And then what you could do is you could break off. You want to make sure that there's at least a piece about this big with it, but you would plant that in the earth with that nub facing upward, and with just the littlest amount of soil over it. And I put it I would put something like that, you know, that size in a pot about this big, because you really want to give it, or even a bigger pot, but as an experiment, a smaller pot would do. And it'll put up a nice green stalk. It's not super amazing, the stalk. Like, it's not like a super ornamental plant, but it's still exciting. So holy basil, we spoke a little bit about holy basil. Lavender, oh yeah?
I've been growing it.
Uh-huh.
The last couple of summers. One of the amazing things about it is the bees. They go wild. There's just bees everywhere on this plant. It's incredible. And that makes me very happy.
Yeah, it's a nice pollinator, well, right. It's a nice pollinator plant. And many of these are, so holy basil is also in the mint family, as is lavender and lemon balm. So the one thing that I would say about lavender is that we want to put it in, if we're using it in a tea form, lavender will get bitter rather rapidly. So if I'm making it in a tea, I only steep it for about 6 minutes or it gets bitter. And if I'm making it in a tea blend, I'll only add it as about 6% of the tea blend, or the whole tea ends up tasting like lavender. It'll take over the flavor. Yeah. Yes. Oh, hi, Linda. The question was, what was the question? Oh my goodness. I don't know. Well, the next question, I'll make sure that I repeat it. So marshmallow. Marshmallow will also do well in a moist environment. I've grown it in both dry places and moist environments. It does fine in both, but I think it would prefer a slightly moister soil. It's the roots that are used or the leaves. So it's a perennial, and it's really nice and demulcent. So a demulcent herb is something that brings moisture to the mucous membranes. So really lovely in that way. It will add a moisture to other teas. You could dry the leaves and add it to other teas if a tea is too astringent, because sometimes teas are like, even like rose. Rose is delicious, it's wonderful, but sometimes it's a little too tightening and to the digestive tract perhaps. So by adding marshmallow, it brings in some of this mucilaginous property or this demulcent action. I think leaves, I use root and leaves in my herbal practice, and I'll usually reserve the roots for if I want to add it into other plants that are roots. Like if I'm creating a tea for somebody that has burdock root in it, for example, it makes a lot of sense to have other roots going into that tea. Whereas if I want something moistening and I'm making holy basil, I'm going to add marshmallow leaves. It just makes it easier because you kind of feel like you have all of the same types of friends together. You know what I'm saying? Like it just works nicely that way. Meadowsweet also likes a moist environment. It'll do okay in dry, but it really prefers a slightly damper environment. Meadowsweet will get quite tall. Another name for it is Queen of the Meadow. And the meadowsweet that I'm referring to here is Filipendula ulmaria. Filipendula, Filipendula, ulmaria. And it's the tops of the plants that are used. And when I was talking about pain or muscular discomfort or even joint discomfort, meadowsweet contains a precursor to salicylic acid. So it behaves very much in the body the way an aspirin does without the liver challenging qualities. So this is a really nice one. I've seen meadowsweet plants that get very large. Like if you wanted to, this could become a really nice ornamental piece and be quite big around. It needs the right environment, like a nice moist area in order for that to happen. Oh yeah. So the question was, does someone have to be careful with meadowsweet if they're on blood thinners? Yes and no. I would not be thinking about extreme caution. I would be thinking about consideration. So if someone's on Coumadin, I would want to do a double check with their physician and just make sure their physician is comfortable with it. But as Mischa Schuler, if I were going to recommend it to my dad, for example, I would say use small amounts. See how you feel. I mean, if the person is already taking an aspirin, and if they were going to take out the aspirin and use Meadowsweet instead, I would not be worried at all. But usually if someone's taking Coumadin, they're not also taking a baby aspirin. So, yeah, that question is tricky. Yeah. I hope I answered it somewhat reasonably. It tastes really good and has a really interesting sweet smell, and for like a hip discomfort can be really nice, along with another plant that I don't have listed here, but that grows beautifully in the shade, and it's Solomon seal. I just don't think of it as a tasty tea per se, but it's an amazing plant, and Meadowsweet and Solomon seal work beautifully together for hip ligament issues. If there's painfulness in the hip, the Solomon seal, it's the root that's used, and Solomon seal is another example of a plant that is it's okay in slightly damp areas. It does very well in shady areas. Even like we have Solomon seal in the yard that gets sun only. I don't know. It's shady until 10. It gets shade starting at 10 in the morning, I want to say, in the summertime, which is pretty early in the morning. So it does okay with 70% shade. It would.
No direct sun ever.
Oh, okay. Dude, that's great.
I can't get rid of it there. Yeah.
That's great. I've also seen it growing in. You don't like it?
It's just like a little army in my side yard.
So interesting. And the way you feel about Lily of the Valley too.
I love the lilies. They all are beautiful. Man.
Well, I mean, maybe you can start making Solomon seal medicine for all of your friends.
For Portland.
For all of Portland, seriously. No, truly. I would be interested in possibly trading something for your Solomon or for some of your Solomon seal. I mean, this is one of the fun things about being here tonight is having conversations of like, well, what can we share with each other? Because yes, of course, spend time looking at the Fedco seed catalog and the Johnny seed catalog, but like, how can we share with our community? Yeah. So the Solomon seal, it's the root. It has a relationship very specific to the ligaments. It's a circulatory stimulant to the ligaments because ligaments don't really have a lot of blood flow to them. So Solomon seal is specific for bringing blood flow to the area. And so if there's been ligament damage for ball and socket joints, so shoulders, if someone's, dislocated a shoulder and it's not healing super well, or if somebody has had hip dysplasia of some kind, or even some minor arthritic pain, or someone is postpartum and they're having just discomfort in their hip area after giving birth, Solomon seal as a nice rub over the area could be really helpful. But again, it's specific to ligaments of the ball and socket joints. I've also, combination of Meadowsweet, Solomon seal, and actually St. John's wort oil can be so nice. The St. John's wort oil is really specific for inflamed nerve endings. So here what you're doing is you're supporting inflamed nerve endings, you're supporting ligament circulation, and you're supporting, what was the third herb? Oh, right, Meadowsweet. You've got a actual analgesic. You have a pain relieving herb in there as well. So very nice combination, topically in oil. Also taken internally in tincture would also be okay. There are contraindications with St. John's wort though. So I wouldn't use St. John's wort with nursing. There's some data that show that it can cause drowsiness in a baby. So, and also, it wouldn't be my first go-to herb unless we'd weighed out the pros and cons for somebody who was pregnant.
St. John's wort for neuropathy?
St. John's, right, for neuropathy. Totally okay topically to be using St. John's wort while pregnant or nursing, but not appropriate to take internally because of its impact on the liver. And St. John's wort will speed up the how quickly hormonal medications are processed in the body. So insulin, I can't think of any other hormonal medications right now. Insulin, oral contraception. Thyroid medication. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. So I wouldn't use it, but topically would be totally okay. But traditionally, St. John's wort was used topically and internally for ghost pain. So if somebody had had an amputation, loss of a limb, but was still experiencing the discomfort as though the arm were still there, a painful kind of burning sensation, really incredible for that. And so for, I talked about lemon balm early on as being a specific for cold sores, or shingles. St. John's wort would be another friend that you could incorporate with your lemon balm as a topical application for the tingling that comes with a cold sore. I mean, I haven't really had that experience, but people who experience a tingling sensation know a cold sore is coming. If you have your lemon balm, or you have your St. John's wort oil, or a combination of the two, and use it right away topically, you're probably not going to have an outbreak. I have no idea what time it is. If someone could tell me what time it is, that'd be great.
7:05.
When is class over? 7:30? Yeah. Whatever. No. I mean, yes, but so mullein loves to be in dry areas. It'll do fine in like an ordinary garden, but it's not going to like wet feet. We'll often find it in sort of like rocky areas. It's got a really kind of lovely smoky taste, and it's typically the leaves that are used for as a lung tonic. So if somebody has had a history of having a lot of chest colds this winter, I might be thinking like, oh, drinking mullein leaf tea for several months, 2 or 3 months, would be a lovely way to rehabilitate their lungs. And we could talk a little bit more about it. The flowers are really lovely. I talk about it all here. The flowers are antiviral, and when infused in olive oil with garlic, make a wonderful ear oil for middle ear infections. It's all here. But it's still fun to say it out loud. We talked a little bit about nettles. A perennial, they sting, but the sting tells you that they're very nutritive. Fresh nettles taste so good. They really taste much better fresh and sweeter and more delicate than they do when you make tea with dried nettle flower or nettle leaves. It's actually remarkable. They make a really nice, you could make them in like a lasagna or throw them into like an early spring soup or anything like this. And I usually harvest the nettles when they're this big. And then this year they got away from me and they started going to seed. So we'll see what the garden looks like next year. I didn't tell my husband. But what you want to do, if you can, is you want to keep them sort of not mown down, so to speak, but you want to continuously harvest them when they get to be about 18 inches or even a foot to 18 inches, so that they never go to seed, so that you're just continuously harvesting them. And, you might not want a bunch of nettle friends in your yard. Or your neighbor doesn't want a bunch of nettle friends in their yard. They like moist, their typical habitat is a moist floodplain, like a low floodplain where they'll get an early spring rain that brings all the minerals down from the mountains. And that's part of, they love to draw up this nice mineral richness. So they can handle being flooded, but they don't want to be flooded all the time, if that makes sense. The taproot is also used for prostate issues and also dribbling, particularly in men. So that it's tonifying to the urinary tract. I've never harvested nettle root before, so I can't really speak to that, but that is one of the specific indications for nettle root. Yeah. So the question is, if you're not really tending your herbs, will they kind of get overgrown? I mean, sort of. It's kind of like kids. If you don't give them attention, they get a little unruly. And that's what happens to the garden. And some people, like me a little bit, kind of like that. I can work with that. I kind of get a kick out of it. You kind of see where certain plants like to reseed, and you get a sense of like, oh, well, maybe they actually like this part of the yard better. But for some people, if you really like a manicured look, then the way you're going to relate to them is a little different. I think if your real intention is for medicine, then one has to pay a little bit of attention so that we know that we're harvesting when the plants are particularly vital, if we're going to use them for medicine, or even if we're going to use them for just really nice spices for hummus or whatever. I'm not answering your question though. I mean, it's like very philosophical. I do think that in terms of weeds, the way I like to deal with weeds in our garden is I will buy straw, not hay, because hay will still have seeds, and then you'll bring maybe seeds that you don't want that might germinate in your garden. But I like to use a straw mulch. And what's interesting is like with the straw mulch in the early spring, I have a lot of perennials. So the perennials will come up nicely through the straw without any trouble. But if there are any weeds, what's a weed? It's just a plant in a place where you'd prefer not to be, right? If there's anybody who I don't feel like belongs in that area, I will say, thank you, and I will harvest it. Sometimes it goes right into my mouth. Sometimes it goes in the compost, or if I'm in my vegetable beds, I'll put straw all over the bed. Some years I've done newspaper first, like wetted the earth, put newspapers over, just like 1 or 2 layers. It's basically dampening it down so that any seeds that I would prefer not to germinate, if they germinate, they're just going to hit the newspaper. And then I put straw over it, and then I'll kind of punch a hole through the straw and the newspaper and plant a plant in there. So if it's a tomato plant that I've grown from seed or I got at the farmer's market, it just goes right into that place. And then there isn't really a spot around the plant for any weeds to grow. That's been really quite exceptional. The challenge with that is like we talked briefly about calendula, right? Calendula loves to reseed. It reseeds enthusiastically. But if you put a lot of straw down, you may or may not get all the seed. You know what I'm saying? It's like, there's a little bit of a dance, and I'm still learning. I've only been gardening for maybe 10 years. So it's like, it sounds like a long time, but it's every year's, you don't know what you're going to learn. And sometimes you think something's going to work and it doesn't. So, but I really, the newspaper straw suggestion that I just offered is a permaculture tool, and I'm sure it's a tool in other gardening styles as well. But it makes it easy, and it makes it really joyful to go outside and be like, I don't need to spend my time weeding. I can spend my time really just appreciating. But there's something nice about weeding too, because it really encourages you to like be in the earth. So, like last year I got lazy and didn't do the mulch thing, and I noticed, but it also encouraged me to really get relational with this one plant in our yard. This is a damp area. It's a geranium, and it just takes over, and it's like, so I'm like, it's a reminder to be like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, even though I'm down on my hands and knees, like really not wanting this particular enthusiastic plant. And we have to give ourselves permission to be taught by the plants. That's like one of the, and so even the frustrating things are like, oh yeah, oh right, okay. Yeah.
Where did you get the straw?
Where did I get the straw? I got it at Paris Farmers Union. Let's see. Oregano, wonderful antiviral and antimicrobial. If you want to harvest it for spices in the fall, I would say this for all of the spices like oregano, thyme, sage. Best to harvest them before they go to flower. Once the plants go to flower, the aromatic oils are less abundant. Like oregano at the end of the season really doesn't smell that much like oregano, which is usually when I'm like, oh, I should really harvest them to bring inside. Oh, well, just like last year, I guess I'll just wait till next year. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, my oregano is definitely taking over. So this year, my plan is to literally dig some out. So if anybody here would like some oregano, I'll have it in abundance. make sure I write that down so I can really follow through on what I just said. Like, I'm really into giving plants away. This is one of the things about the plants. They're so abundant and they're so generous. So, it's a, you know, just like our friend here who was talking about her Solomon seal. She's like, I can't wait to get rid of it, you know? Raspberry canes. So peppermint will also take over. I also have peppermint if anybody wants peppermint. Any hands raised for peppermint? Actually, it's not peppermint, it's spearmint. Is that still acceptable? Okay. Okay. Anyone in the audience who isn't here in the room? Linda, did you want some peppermint or spearmint? I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding, but send me an email. Raspberry leaf, raspberry canes, they will also be really enthusiastic and abundant. They do like to have some manure or good quality compost added every spring. If you're going to harvest raspberry leaf to support the uterus or as a general nutritive tonic, I recommend harvesting the canes that don't have berries on them. And you want to harvest the newest leaves, the youngest leaves. It's also okay if you use the leaves that are further down on the canes and that are older, but it's again, like, if you have the choice, you're going to use the most recently grown ones. But again, this is the nice thing about the plants, that they're really open to, you know, even the oregano at the end of the season that's gone into flower. Well, sometimes if that's what you have, that's what you have, and you chop it up finely and you add it into some, you know, sour cream, and it is delicious. But, you know, it's not like as the same way that it would be in July, but it's okay. It's still delicious. It's its own flavor of delicious. Red clover, I grew red clover in the garden this year. It's a very gentle cough remedy. It's a lymphatic remedy, so it drains the upper respiratory areas. If a little person has chronic ear infections, so if that's a consideration for a child or a grandchild, something to consider, really gentle. I used to do Birth Roots. It's a nonprofit organization on State Street, which is actually exciting. They're moving to a new space on Havana Street in the next couple of months. I think that's public. I don't think I just told a big secret. But okay, so I'm allowed. I didn't just tell everybody on Facebook that that's happening. So really great organization, and they offer fun programs for children under 3. And I would make red clover tea for these programs, and the kids who had eczema or coughs would keep coming back to the table for more red clover tea. It naturally tastes sweet. It's also really specific for supporting breast tissue and also hormonal regulation. So if someone is wanting to conceive, if someone is moving towards menopausal transition, or even postmenopause, it supports moistening of tissues, particularly lubrication. So that can be really lovely. And it's a nitrogen fixer in the same way that beans are. It's a legume. So really good for, really good for growing, and then even like you can harvest the flowers and then turn it under or plant right into your red clover, if you want. I mean, I'd probably cut it and let it lay. Are you telling me that I have 5 minutes left?
No, there's something.
Oh, there's something. Okay, she just did this. It was so graceful, but I was like, is she trying to be sneaky? Rosemary is wonderful for supporting. It said rosemary is for remembrance. It brings blood to the brain. Like, it literally crosses the blood-brain barrier and supports increased circulation to the cranium. So, and it tastes so good. Nice for respiratory tract things, lungs in particular. It can be really resinous, so it will break up stagnation in the lungs. But this is another herb that I usually think of steeping for more like 8 minutes rather than 12 minutes, because it will get bitter. Because the longer it gets in the heat, the more resins will kind of come off into the water. Sage is for night sweats. It's very astringent. So sore throat, if there's, or edematous tissue in the throat, can be really nice for that. So, we're also thinking about culinary spices. So oregano, sage, thyme, these are all things that, if you've got one little garden bed or one little section of pots on your porch, those are all really nice ones. Now the rosemary is not going to overwinter. It's very unlikely to overwinter. Really?
Oh, outside. Oh, no.
Oh, you brought it in. That's awesome. Mine is not doing well inside. In fact, it doesn't. I don't know what I did wrong this year. I've had it, rosemary. I'm so glad that yours is. I'm really excited that yours is doing really well. So the comment here was that someone's brought a rosemary inside, and she's saying that her strategy is to water it almost every day and spritz it. She's recreating a Mediterranean climate in her south-facing window for the rosemary plant. It's a very lucky plant. I'm really excited that it's doing well. Lavender also is a Mediterranean plant that's unlikely to overwinter. I have a lavender inside right now that's doing okay, but it's, yeah. So St. John's wort grows really abundantly. It's not native to North America. It's a European plant that's been brought over. It's got a funny thing going. It'll like a place for like 2 or 3 years, and then it'll seem to disappear, but it'll reappear in another part of the garden. It'll do well in dry or slightly damp areas. I've seen it be happy in either. And it makes, we talked a little bit about the St. John's wort oil for inflamed nerves. We talked about it as, a wonderful liver herb. Although if somebody is taking hormonal medications, not a good mix. And I also think of it, St. John's wort, we talk about it as for dysthenia, low-grade depression. But I think the way that it's working is that it's working to clear the liver. And I also think it does gently stimulate serotonin receptors. And we have about 20 times more serotonin receptors in the digestive tract, in the gut, than we do in the brain. So I don't really know for sure. I'm not convinced that it crosses the blood-brain barrier. I think it stays in the digestive system and it's working that way to support mood, improve mood. But I don't know for sure. That's Mischa Schuler speaking. That's not like a textbook. That's just my observation. There are wonderful other things that we can do for mood, though, like St. John's wort. We could be using holy basil, and as I said at the very beginning, that really is a heart opener. I'm going to talk about violet and yarrow, and then we'll kind of switch gears. So violet, many of us probably have that in our yards. Violet flower is a gentle lymphatic remedy. It's slightly moistening and somewhat cooling. But also the leaves are heart-shaped. And if you've ever watched the leaves unfurl, which they kind of look like, I could probably draw this, but it kind of looks like this. That's not very good. The way the parts up here are, they kind of curl in and circle in. And to me, it looks like breast tissue. Violet is a really specific lymphatic remedy for breast tissue. So if somebody has, has a history of mastitis, postpartum, we want to think about violet as a general remedy. It's cooling. It's a cooling anti-inflammatory and moves the lymph. But it's also really specific for children. It's slightly sweet. And I've used it for eczema for little people, in addition to red clover and burdock. And some other things, depending on the child, what other things would go in a formula, but as a tea. Oh yeah.
Is that the white, the purple, all the different colored violets?
All the different colored violets, and you can harvest the leaves and the flowers. So I usually harvest like around Mother's Day. I'll harvest the flowers, and then maybe a couple weeks later, I'll start harvesting the leaves. And
You dry them for tea? Is that what's up?
gosh, if I'm harvesting the flowers, I almost always will make a tincture or I'll make a syrup. And like I'll add them to a little bit of honey and let them sit in the honey. And the leaves, those I'll dry for tea, or I'll make a tincture, a lymphatic tincture. And would it be useful for me to talk for a moment about tinctures? How to make a tincture? What time is it? I know, sorry. Okay, great. So making a tincture, I feel a little unprepared tonight. Like I feel like I don't have all of the things to demonstrate all the things. But if I had a quart mason jar, it doesn't have to be a quart mason jar. It could be a pint jar. Let's start with a pint jar because that might feel more manageable if you're harvesting violet blossoms, which are really beautiful, but it takes probably like 45 minutes to like feel like you have like a cup, maybe a cup and a half worth of violet flowers. Like it takes some time. So you would put those flowers into your pint jar. And then let's say that half the pint is full. I would pour, probably use 80 proof, so 40% alcohol. And I would cover the flowers plus a little bit more, like an extra half an inch or so above the flowers. And I would let it sit in a place that doesn't have a lot of temperature fluctuation, and that's not in direct sun, so like a north-facing room or something like this. Kitchen table at our house, as I've already said, much to my husband's chagrin. And I let it sit for 4 to 6 weeks, and then I strain it out. But in earnest, usually it's more like 5 months later. I'm pressing out things now from the summer because it's just like so busy. It's such like, yeah, because there's so much to do. And you could do the same thing with the leaves. So a couple of weeks later, but you'll notice that the violet flowers are sweeter than the leaves. The leaves taste more mineral rich. So you could also dry the leaves and you could use them as part of a mineral rich tonic, like with the nettles, the red raspberry leaf, the comfrey, the other things we talked about. Violet would go lovely in that batch. And it has that lymphatic quality, which those others don't necessarily have. So it has this other aspect to it. Yarrow is the most excellent wound remedy I can think of in an acute situation. It's great for bruises. It's great for if you like are bleeding. I mean, if you're really bleeding, you want to go to the emergency room, of course. But if you crumple the yarrow, or you can chew it, but if you crumple the yarrow and put it directly over an area, it's a styptic. It will stop bleeding. And the flowers and the leaves. You can use just leaves. I've done it with just leaves if I'd already harvested the flowers or if the flowers weren't out yet. It's also antimicrobial. So generally speaking, like there's it's like I'm not worried about like it's cleansing, you know, as this is happening. It's not like I'm worried that I need to like make sure then later that it's always a good idea to flush out a wound, but like if that's not available, I wouldn't be achingly worried about the situation because yarrow has such antimicrobial properties. It was also historically used on the battlefield. It was dried and powdered and put directly into wounds that way. So as you know, if flushing out a wound wasn't available, so it was packed right into a wound. It will kind of not cauterize, but it will close up capillaries that are actively bleeding, and it will stimulate blood from other local capillaries to come to bring appropriate immune white blood cells to kind of flush out any pathogens, but also to bring good quality blood to begin the healing process rapidly. It's really cool. And also it's good for burns that way, topically as a salve. And it's also good for bruises. Like one time I was doing something silly on my bike and I fell over and I was like all bruised up on one side and I like rode my bike around and I found the one yarrow plant. I was like, I had to fall over a fence to get there. I was like, so anyway, I like basically applied yarrow to myself for about 20 minutes and then I biked home, and the next day the side that I had bruised up was like I never had an injury. But the other side, I didn't realize the day before I also had a bruise on the other side, but I hadn't put any yarrow there, and I was big black and blue there. So it was a really cool, unintentional, double blind. It wasn't really double blind, but you know, this experience where I was like, oh my gosh, this really works, you know? And also a wonderful fever remedy. But if we're working with fevers, we want to make sure that the water that we're using is hot because we want to stimulate dilating blood vessels and bringing them closer to the surface of the skin so that we're throwing off heat. So we need hot water to help with that process. So I can't believe we went through these 29 tasty teas for kids and grown-ups and easy to grow at home. Like, I'm really impressed that you stayed with me, and I've had eye contact with most of you. Like, it's like that you haven't fallen asleep. So I would like now for you, I'm hoping that as you did this process, that you wrote down some of the herbs that were kind of exciting or curious. And I would love for you to just take 2 minutes with your buddy. I want your buddy left, but maybe you can kind of gather, but just take 2 minutes and chat with the person next to you to kind of talk through like what was valuable and what will you consider, growing in your garden. And then we'll take 5 minutes for questions after that. Ready, go. Any questions? I'm sure that there are questions, but any questions that I might be able to answer tonight? Yes.
Do you have recommendations or tips on getting the herbs started? I think you should get them started before you put them out.
What a good question. Okay, when to start your plants? I usually start my plants at the end of March. If it's tomato plants, early March. Sometimes I start mine in late February, and then I'm frustrated with myself that I started them early. They get leggy. So, yeah. I mean, and then, so I'll start them inside, and I usually use like, sometimes I'll buy Olivia's Garden vegetable or the salad greens. And this time of year, I keep those containers, and then I put soil in those containers, and then I'll plant some things in the container. Sometimes I'll buy individual pots, but I just find I end up having to transplant them up, and I don't love that. It's like time consuming. So I just put them right into we do have one grow light. So we have like one table and one grow light. So I'm limited. So what I've started to do is grow perennials so that I'm just adding a few more perennials to the herb garden each year. And I focus most of my growing for vegetables now, because I've established enough perennials when I say now. What else can I say about that? The biggest piece is watering them. So once you put the seeds in, the nice thing about the Olivia Garden tops, if you can take off the Olivia's Garden label, then they're see-through, and you can just use that as a lid until the plants start germinating. So you get a really nice moistened environment. If you don't do that, saran wrap, it does work totally okay. We have a cat, so we also have this our cat's really interested in sprouts. So we also put saran wrap around the table so that Moonbeam can't jump up onto the table. It's kind of ridiculous. It's takes up a lot of space in our house. And then the biggest piece I've noticed is making sure that you water, because once they germinate, they really do need a lot of water every day. So if you're going away for a weekend, enlist your neighbor to come over and water them. And that's a really important piece, I think. I have not really found a solution about that. I usually start planting starting in the 20s of May. Starting May 20th and after. What I'll do though is I'll do what the process called hardening off. So one morning, usually starting on a Saturday when I know I'm going to be around, I put the tray of plants outside for 2 hours or so in the sun. Then I'll bring them back inside so they don't get sunburned, because that's real. Then the next day I'll put them outside for 4 hours and then bring them back inside. And I'll probably do that one more day, and then, or I'll put them in an area where I know they'll get shade for the second half of the day or something like that. Even afternoon sun is particularly overwhelming early on in a plant's life, I think. So once the hardening off has happened, then they start going in the earth. And that's pretty exciting. And, I'll do things that are, sometimes, again, it's an experiment. sometimes you're like, oh, I don't know, it might be too young or not quite ready or not quite sturdy enough to put it in the garden. Sometimes I'll be surprised, or sometimes I'll be really disappointed. So it's an experiment. And what you can also do is you can, put some of your plants in the ground and reserve a few. Reserve a few in case there's some oopsies. So, other questions?
If we are planting our own herbs and we want to harvest roots, how do we go about that? Do we rub out the whole thing, or do we just cut it up into pieces?
Oh, great question.
Burdock or something like that?
Okay, so the question was, if we want to harvest the plant, a root of a plant, are we, bless you, in general, like wiping out the whole plant? Yes. So the biennials, like burdock and dandelion's a perennial, but you're kind of, you're wiping out the plant, but with gratitude, saying thank you for sure. But like marshmallow and elecampane, which are perennial plants, or the Solomon seal, another perennial plant, you can harvest a piece of the root and then just have awareness of where those kind of bumps are that we sort of tried to talk about earlier when we were talking about the ginger. Have awareness of where those are. So you're just harvesting the portions that don't have like the bumps, and you're still allowing a chunk to put back in the earth. And I'll harvest roots in the spring and again in the fall. Like I harvest, if anybody here harvests Japanese knotweed, it's really specific for, it's a really phenomenal anti-inflammatory, but I harvest that in the spring generally, usually April tax day. Take your frustration out on the Japanese knotweed. But one thing that you have to be careful of is if you harvest Japanese knotweed, it's usually under leaf litter, and it's a tick habitat. So you have to take care that you just have to have awareness that you do a tick check, that you're well dressed. I mean, April, it's usually warm enough to be well dressed, but Other questions? Thoughtful questions? That was really good questions. Oh, stupid questions welcome.
So I think I asked you.
Oh, right.
About pests. You have any squirrels everywhere?
Oh, squirrels? Oh my God. I don't know. Eating them? BBs? I don't know. I'm not really sure. No, I mean, I've really only noticed squirrels eating sunflower seed heads in our garden. But I haven't really noticed them eating other things in our garden. So, cause they're...
They eat everything in our house.
Really?
Saltine crackers and chocolate.
Where are they getting the saltine crackers?
I have no idea. I'm just gonna have to from my neighbor.
That's so interesting. I don't know. Yeah. But if you use a BB gun, you have to eat it. You gotta skin the squirrel, eat the squirrel. I've got Fedco seed catalogs here and Johnny's Select Seeds catalogs here for you. Take a pen should you like. And I have like a million cards here, but have a card if you'd like. I do want to tell you about a fun class that's coming up in May that hasn't been put out on the web yet through the Resilience Hub. It's 4 Tuesday evenings in May from 6 to 8:30 p.m. And it's basically seeing the plants in the garden the way they look in the wintertime. I never cut the herbs back. So you get to see what they look like at the end of their life cycle, so to speak. And then as they're emerging through dormancy, and we have about 70 medicinal plants in our backyard, so it's a great time to see the spring ephemerals. And we live in Portland. We have about 0.2 acres, just under 0.2 acres, but it's pretty remarkable about what is possible to do in a small space. It can, I think, be kind of exciting and interesting to see. And I'm a feral gardener. Like I'm not a very, as you can see by my demeanor, I'm kind of easy, and that's sort of the way the garden is. So that's the perspective you would see. And we'd talk a lot about plants. We'd get to take some home. We'd get to make some medicine. And I have space for 13, 14, or 15 people. We have a yurt in our backyard, so it's kind of a neat, anyway. So, yeah, if you're interested in that, please be in contact. And I also offer beginner herbal apprenticeships that start in September, and those also take place in the yurt. They're one Wednesday a month for 10 months. So thank you so very much for coming. It's really fun to see everybody. And thank you also to Coastal Pharmacy and Wellness for hosting this event and making things like this possible. There's some really neat things coming up in the